Before we dive into this spine-chilling story, please subscribe for more daily creepy horror stories. I never thought I'd end up working the night shift at a funeral home. It wasn't exactly on my bucket list, you know? Life just has this way of shoving you into corners you'd never imagine yourself in. For me, it all started after I was falsely accused of a crime I didn't commit. It was the worst kind of nightmare, being blamed for something you didn't do, having people look at you like you're guilty, even when you're not. After months of whispers, accusations, and side eyes, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to get away, start fresh somewhere quiet. That's how I ended up at Holloway Funeral Home. It's not exactly a dream job, but it checked all the boxes. It was out of sight, quiet, and far enough from anyone who might recognize me. The place is tucked at the edge of town, surrounded by empty fields and that kind of eerie stillness you only find in places people avoid after dark. The building itself is old, maybe 100 years or more. The wooden floors creak with every step, and the walls seem to swallow up sound, like even the house itself wants to stay quiet. It's the kind of place where the air feels heavy, and you can't help but whisper, even when there's no one else around. When I showed up for the interview, I met Mr. Carver, the day manager. He was this wiry guy, probably in his 60s, with a face that looked like it hadn't smiled in decades. He didn't ask a lot of questions, which was fine by me. I wasn't exactly eager to explain my past, and he didn't seem interested. He hired me on the spot. No fuss, no small talk, just, "You'll start tonight, night shift." I wasn't about to argue. Before I left, he handed me a clipboard. There was a single sheet of paper on it with a list of rules typed out in bold letters. I scanned them quickly, and my first thought was, what kind of joke is this? "Here," he said, in a tone as dry as the air in the room. "You'll need to follow these. They're non-negotiable." I must have had a confused look on my face because he added, "Trust me, it's important." I nodded and read the rules again, this time more carefully. Rule 1, always leave a light on in the viewing room. Rule 2, do not enter the crematorium between 2 and 4 a.m. Rule 3, always leave the back door locked. Rule 4, if the power goes out, stay in the main hallway until the lights return. Rule 5, never take anything home from the funeral home. I glanced back up at him, waiting for him to crack a smile or explain what this was all about. But Mr. Carver just stared at me with this tired, almost defeated expression. "These are the rules," he said. "Follow them and you'll be fine. Break them and—" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Well, just don't break them." I half laughed, trying to lighten the mood. "Come on, Mr. Carver, you're not serious, are you?" He didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. "You'll understand soon enough," he said, turning on his heel and walking away, leaving me standing there with the clipboard in hand. I remember thinking, this job might be quieter than I thought, but it sure isn't normal. My task was simple enough: keep everything in order during the night. After Mr. Carver left, I locked the front door and settled into the chair behind the desk. The building was quiet, with only the faint hum of the lights in the hallway breaking the stillness. I kept my eyes on the dimly lit corridors, listening for any sounds, but there was nothing. The place was as empty as I expected. The first couple of hours passed uneventfully. I took a walk around the building, checking the rooms as I had been instructed. The rooms were all locked, and everything seemed in place. It was the kind of night where nothing felt out of the ordinary, which, in a way, was a relief. The viewing room was the most unsettling. It wasn't the room itself, but the sense of quiet that filled it. The overhead light hummed softly, the only sound in the room. I stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the casket in the center. It seemed like a simple, ordinary space, but something about the stillness of it made me uneasy. I glanced at the rules again, reminding myself that Rule 1 was to always leave the light on in the viewing room. It seemed unnecessary, but I didn't question it. I flipped the switch to ensure the light stayed on, then moved on to the next room. The building's stillness felt heavier in the viewing room, and I could feel the quiet seeping into my thoughts. But I reminded myself that it was just an old building, and old buildings creaked and settled. Nothing more to it. With the light on, I left the viewing room, walking down the hallway towards the other rooms. The building was as quiet as before, and I continued with my rounds, checking the rest of the rooms, making sure everything was in order. Around 1:45 a.m., I found myself near the crematorium. The building felt even quieter than usual, and the air seemed a bit cooler as I walked past. I wasn't sure why, but I'd ended up near the crematorium again. Maybe it was just habit, checking the rooms, or maybe I'd just gotten a bit too comfortable with my routine. The door to the crematorium was slightly ajar, just enough to catch my attention. I hesitated for a moment, standing there at the threshold. The rule about not entering between 2 and 4 a.m. had been drilled into my mind. It wasn't something I wanted to test, but there was something about that half-open door that made me curious. I stepped closer, my eyes scanning the room through the crack, but then I stopped myself. The rule had been clear, and I had no reason to risk breaking it, especially when I had no idea why it was in place. I shook off the urge and reached out, pushing the door closed with a soft click. The sound echoed down the hallway, and I felt a strange sense of relief as the door was shut. I glanced at my watch, 1:50 a.m., too close to 2 a.m. for comfort. I made a mental note to avoid the area for the next hour, deciding it wasn't worth pushing my luck. As I turned to walk away, I thought I heard a faint rustling sound. It was soft, almost like a piece of paper crinkling or fabric shifting. I froze for a second, straining to listen, but the sound stopped as quickly as it had started. I turned around, scanning the hallway, but there was nothing. The hallway was empty, just as quiet as it had been. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was probably just the building settling. I continued on my rounds, keeping my focus on the task at hand. But there was something about the silence after that small sound that left me feeling uneasy, like I was being watched. At 3 a.m., the lights flickered, and for a split second, I thought it was just a glitch. But then, the entire funeral home was plunged into darkness. My heart jumped in my chest, and I froze for a moment, trying to adjust to the sudden blackness. My fingers scrambled for my phone, the tiny click of the screen cutting through the silence as I powered it on. The flashlight on my phone flickered to life, casting a weak beam of light that barely cut through the dark. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and started moving toward the main hallway. The soft shuffle of my footsteps was the only sound, the floors creaking under my weight as I made my way down the corridor. The silence felt thick, heavy, as if the darkness was swallowing up every sound. The rule about staying in the hallway suddenly felt less like a superstition and more like a lifeline. I pressed my back against the cold wall, the slight scrape of fabric against the rough surface breaking the stillness. My breathing was shallow, quick, and every tiny sound seemed to echo in the vast emptiness. The hum of the building's air system was gone, replaced by the occasional creak of the old wood settling. It was as if the whole building had gone completely still, holding its breath with me. Time stretched, and I began to feel like I was stuck in a moment that would never end. My phone's beam of light seemed almost pointless in the thick darkness. The distant groan of the floorboards above echoed faintly, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched, even though I knew no one else was in the building. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the lights flickered back to life with a loud buzz, casting a harsh, sterile glow across the hallway. I exhaled sharply, my body relaxing just slightly as the familiar light returned. My hands were trembling, my fingers a little numb from gripping my phone too tightly. I quickly pocketed it, the soft thud of my phone against my leg barely registering as I tried to calm down. The darkness had felt alive, oppressive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been watching me, waiting. But now, with the lights back on, everything seemed normal again. As I resumed my rounds, the silence of the funeral home felt heavy. The creak of my boots on the floor echoed in the empty hallways. I moved through the building, checking the rooms methodically. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flicker of movement. It was so brief, so small, that I wasn't sure if I had imagined it. I jerked my head toward the movement, my heart skipping a beat as my eyes scanned the empty hallway. Thud, thud, thud. I paused, scanning the hallway. No one. Just the quiet stillness of the building. Shaking it off, I continued my rounds, trying to focus. But the feeling of being watched lingered. It was subtle, like something was just behind me, always out of sight. The rest of the night passed without incident. The silence returned, and the unease faded just enough for me to finish my shift. By the time I locked the front door and stepped out into the cool night air, I was ready to leave. I hoped the feeling wouldn't follow me home. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the thought, had I really seen something, or had it just been my imagination? The next night, the shadow appeared again. This time, it was more distinct, a dark figure at the edge of my vision. It didn't move when I turned to face it, but it didn't vanish either. It lingered in the corner of my sight, like something waiting. I froze for a moment, my breath catching, but when I looked directly at it, the figure remained just out of reach, as if it was tethered to the darkness. I shook my head, trying to clear the feeling, and forced myself to continue with my rounds, but the sensation of being followed refused to fade. I glanced over my shoulder again. Nothing. The hallway stretched on, empty and silent, but the coldness in the air seemed to follow me, seeping into my skin. Every shadow seemed darker, more oppressive. I couldn't shake the feeling. It was like something was behind me, just a step away, watching my every move. I kept checking over my shoulder, my nerves fraying with each passing hour. The building seemed larger at night, the silence more intense. I tried to stay focused, but the presence, that lingering sensation, was always there. No matter how many times I glanced around, it never fully disappeared. By the third night, the shadow was no longer content to linger in the background. It had become more persistent, following me down the hallways with each step I took. I could feel its presence, always behind me, moving in time with my own. Every time I stopped to check a room or adjust something, it stopped too, just out of my direct line of sight. A cold sweat formed on the back of my neck. I couldn't escape it. I tried to keep my pace steady, walking faster, but the shadow kept up. My heart pounded in my chest, a rhythmic drumbeat that echoed in my ears. Dum, dum, dum. I quickened my pace, hoping to shake off the feeling, but it didn't help. It was as though the building itself had grown larger, the hallways stretching out before me. My footsteps echoed in the silence, the only sound in the otherwise still air. I remembered the rule about keeping the back door locked. It had been drilled into me since my first day, one of the most important rules. But tonight, my fear outweighed any sense of caution. I needed to escape. The back door was my only option. If I could just get outside, maybe I could outrun whatever this was following me. I walked quickly to the back door, my boots making a steady thud against the floorboards as I moved. Reaching the door, I felt my pulse quicken, but I forced myself to steady my hands. I grabbed the key from my pocket, my fingers stiff with anxiety. I inserted it into the lock with a click, the sound sharp in the otherwise silent room. I could feel the weight of the door in my hands as I pulled it open, the hinges groaning in protest. Whoosh. The cold night air hit me instantly, a rush of relief that contrasted sharply with the still, oppressive atmosphere inside the funeral home. I stepped out onto the small concrete landing outside the back door, the gravel crunching under my boots as I took my first full breath of fresh air in hours. I swung the door closed behind me, the sound of it locking with finality in the quiet of the night. My heart raced, but I didn't look back. I just stood there for a moment, feeling the cool breeze against my face, the distant sounds of the night, crickets, the rustling of leaves. I knew I couldn't stay out here forever, but for now, it was a small escape. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. The pressure in my chest was still there, a weight I couldn't shake. The shadow had been so close, its presence nearly suffocating. But now that I was outside, the air felt different. The shadow hadn't been trapped inside, it had been kept out. By opening the door, I had invited it into my world. The shadow lunged toward me, its form shifting and twisting as it enveloped me. I felt an icy weight settle over my chest, and my vision blurred. Memories that weren't mine flashed through my mind, faces, places, lives consumed by the wraith. My breath caught in my throat as the memories continued to flood my mind, each one more foreign than the last. I saw fleeting glimpses of people, their lives abruptly torn from them. Some were screaming, others were silent, their faces contorted in fear as they disappeared into the darkness. I tried to scream, to push it away, but it was as if my own body was no longer my own. When it released me, I staggered back, gasping for air. My body felt heavier, like I was carrying the weight of all those lost lives. I stumbled toward the glass door and caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection. The person staring back at me wasn't me at all. My eyes were dark, hollow, lifeless. The face was gaunt, like something had drained the very essence from me. I reached out a trembling hand, but it wasn't my hand that moved, it was the reflections. I felt a cold rush of dread. Whatever the shadow had done to me, it had taken something vital. My heart pounded, and I wanted to scream, but no sound came. I stumbled back from the door, desperate to escape the reflection, but it mirrored my every move. The silence around me felt suffocating, and I knew, deep down, that I was no longer the person who had walked into this funeral home. Now, I wander the funeral home's halls, my presence a warning to the next unfortunate soul who takes this job. The place feels different now, more oppressive, as if the very air is thick with the weight of everything that's happened. The rooms that once seemed so still now feel like they're alive, waiting for the next person to come through the door. I've learned that time doesn't work the same way here. The days bleed into one another, the hours stretching endlessly, but there's no real sense of passing time. The sound of my footsteps echoing down the hall is the only thing that breaks the silence. I've tried to scream, to cry out for help, but nothing comes out. My voice is gone, just like everything else that once made me human. The clipboard with the rules still sits on the desk where Mr. Carver left it. But now there's one more rule, added in bold, dark ink. Never unlock the back door, no matter what you see or hear. I stand there, staring at the rule. I remember the moment I broke the first rule, the fear that drove me to open that door. I know now that it wasn't just a mistake. It was inevitable. The moment I thought I could escape, I sealed my fate. I am part of the rules now, a grim reminder of what happens when fear overrides caution. The shadow is gone, but its mark remains, etched into the walls, into the rules, and into me. The funeral home will always have a place for those who break its rules, and now I am one of them. There's no going back, no escaping. The next shift will come, and someone else will walk through these doors, blind to the truth. Maybe they'll follow the rules, maybe they won't. But I'll be here, waiting, watching, making sure they don't repeat my mistake. Just like the wraith before me, I am bound to this place, forever. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe for more creepy tales. If you'd like to support the channel, consider buying me a coffee on Ko-Fi. Every bit helps. Links in the description.